Summit 2023 was just an amazing experience. It's over, and as we are looking into the next year, I wanted to bring this show to kind of give you a bit of a wrap up what was discussed, and if you've never heard of South Summit, why you should really pay attention. I am an MC and moderator at South Summit, and of course, I also run the Mary Poppins of Startups Live Show. And for me, South Summit is such a great conference, right? It's a great conference that really brings or highlights even the startups within the south of Europe. But of course, this is only just one part of it because they are also launching in Brazil, in many other places. And for those who've never heard of South Summit, then, well, you should really pay attention. There is a platform where a lot of connections are made, where there are many startups that have gone through South Summit. They've had even like 50 exits, 23 unicorns, and so much more. And you might actually be surprised to know that names like Cabify, Glovo, Sport at Home went through South Summit as well. And in fact, Sport at Home, which I've used so many times before, was one of the finalists at South Summit. So what happened in 2023? So let's find out. Welcome to the Mary Poppins of Startups Live Show. I'm Naili Makangu from Athena Leaders. I'm a technical consultant and startup advisor, and I'll be your host for the show. I'm actually passionate about working with startups to help them grow, develop, looking at the operation, product, and much more. And in this show, we bring to you the best advice, not just for myself. I bring some guests and also talk about the ecosystem in general. So do relax, sit back, and have fun. The theme at South Summit was Today 2030. So where are we going to be in 2013? And more importantly, are we going to reach the goal of a 55% reduction of gas emission by 2030? And what is the impact? What do we need to do when we start looking at the global ecosystem in terms of startups and investors, big organizations, and the likes? What do we need to do and change so that we can actually get there? So what I love about the conference is that it was also a really good time to reflect on where we are today, what needs to be changed, and also sharing. One of the key themes that came up for me was this idea of open innovation and open collaboration. It's something that was talked a lot, and which is actually going to highlight the change of mindset that we are going through so that we can get there. So the first section I'm going to look at are some key questions. And I really love that bit because we cannot ignore the fact that AI is powerful and is here to stay. Some people are scared, some people are excited. I'm personally really excited. But then what are some of the questions that we need to bear in mind when we look at AI and also just innovation in general? So one of the biggest question that was asked was, how do we make sure that the AI algorithms are free from bias, right? So when we look at what we have at the moment, and we look at AI and, especially, ChatGPT, we cannot talk about AI without mentioning them and the impact they've had on the world. There's a lot of people who are worried about, bias and discrimination and what that could happen and what could mean in the future. So that was one of the biggest questions that was also tackled during a lot of the discussions. There was something about transparency as well, right? So how do companies can explain the behavior of their models? Because at the end of the day, there are things that they might not want to share. Other people do want to share a little bit more about the algorithm, the model, some people don't. So how do we open the space to start discussing that and really pushing for transparency? One of the really interesting questions, when not just for AI, but just this idea of open innovation, was research, right? So we talk a lot about deep tech, biotech, and especially with the startups that first needs to spend a lot of time into the research and incubation modes. And it's actually, it happens quite a lot where a lot of great ideas comes from research that were done in, let's say, in universities or certain institutions. So what happened when it comes out on the other side? And that we had a really interesting conversation between Casper Paulsen from Technical University of Catalonia and Jared Yarnall from Biomimicry Institute, when they really looked into the fundamental questions. So one of the key topics was, are we making sure that we are creating founder-friendly policies to retain for the founders to retain their IP when they leave the research world and go into their own startups, right? So that is very important for to help startups to actually go and grow. And in fact, this is a very interesting conversation because I do some work as well with Cambridge University, especially on their program where they help entrepreneurs. And one of the things that we also discussed, and which was discussed by Casper and Jared as well, were this idea of providing additional support. It's one thing coming up with a research project, but when you start moving beyond and you are looking at the next stage of being an entrepreneur, scaling and growing a company, there's like a completely different ball game of things that you need to bear in mind. So yes, are we making do they get the right support and how to do that? And in fact, check out Biomimicry Institute, and the work that they do there is fantastic, and I will definitely recommend that if you are a scientist, you are coming out from academia or from a university and you're moving into the world of your startups, then yeah, they might provide additional support for you. One of the other things I love about that talk, again, when we highlight the idea of open innovation and open collaboration, was how can we make sure that once a startup or once an idea has come out of, let's say, a research institute or university, they still can create some kind of understanding so that they continue to collaborate. And that is very important. One of the things that is not talked about a lot, or you don't hear a lot, especially if you're not in the world, is just the cost it takes to set up a laboratory, right? Startups might raise a very large amount of funding and everything, but would they have the money to buy all of the equipment required? And of course, when we're talking about research, you might evolve your product as you go along. Would you have the money to actually scale up and grow very quickly as a startup that needs certain types of equipment? Whereas if there were more collaboration, even once a startup is moved forward, whether it's with research institution, government institution, or even large companies, then that could help. So when we start thinking about dealing with the challenges or tackling the challenges that we need to reach our goal for today, 2030, yes, open innovation and collaboration is key. And I really love the question that we were looking at as well. One other point that I love on that topic was whether companies are getting the support they need to measure and understand the impact on the planet. So there were a lot of discussions, whether it was from the point of view of investors or from the point of view of startup founders or just anybody in the ecosystem. There was this discussion of, when we talk about people, profit, and planet, that organization needs to start thinking a little bit about the impact they have on the planet, right? And it's not just about, are you flying a lot? So this is something that people ask to talk about, the amount of time you're flying and things like that, recycling. But from a business perspective, you need to go beyond. Some of the questions that needs to be asked a lot more, especially when we start looking at AI, blockchain, all of the deep tech, and all of the new capabilities that we have today. What is the carbon footprint of the technology that we are using? So asking ourselves this question, of course, we want to continue and push innovation. Let us go forward. I love technology, I love startup, I love creativity and all of that. There is a cost to pay for that. And if we are going to reach our goal, how do we make sure that the technology that we are creating is not setting us backwards? So this is really some of the very interesting questions that I thought were nice to highlight at the beginning of the show. And keep watching, because we have even more very, very interesting questions and points that were mentioned, so that it can help you reflect. And also we will finish the show with some parting advice from investors and other startups. So that's, of course, as you know, I love my show to be practical so that you can have something to move forward. Now, before I move on to the next section and look at the goals for 2030, definitely want to give you a reminder. If you were at South Summit 2023 and you're thinking, I really love it, which I know if you loved it if you were there and you want to go again next year, do remember that at the moment they are running a promotion where you get I think it was 50% discount. Don't quote me on that, but you definitely get a discount if you sign up for next year. So don't wait for too long. And if you've never been to South Summit 2023, my question is, what are you waiting for? And the second thing, more importantly, especially for if you are a startup or you know a startup that is struggling, especially when it comes to the technology, the product, the roadmap, the vision, and they're not really sure, then a reminder. On the Friday at the end of every month, we run mentoring sessions, right? So I bring other experts within the startup ecosystem, and we give free one-to-one sessions where we really focus on your problem, just you as your startup, and what is that you are struggling with, and we give you a lot of practical advice. So if you know any startups that are struggling in that sense, send them our way, and we will just kind of look under the hood, what is going on, how can we help with your technology, how can you help with your product or your people or your growth. Yes, that is something not to miss. So the last Friday of every month, and actually if you're watching this live, it's only a couple of weeks away. If not, check our website to get the next dates and how to sign up. South Summit 2023 and the theme of today 2030, right? So just a reminder, is thinking about how, as an ecosystem, as people work in the technology world, how are we doing enough, or what are we doing to reach the goal of reducing the gas emission by 55% in 2030 toward the net zero goal of 2050, right? So in this section, I'm going to look at some of the key points in the discussions and some of the quotes, and highlight some of the topics that really made me think, right? And of course, if I don't mention you, it doesn't mean that I didn't like your talk, but I really trying to do like a very high level summary of some key points and some actionable points as well. And as I work as an MC, I love being able, I have the privilege of listening to so many people within the ecosystem, and listening to so many great ideas. And one of the topics that resonated from absolutely most of the panels I hosted or moderated was this idea of working together, which is why I opened this chat with this idea of open innovation and open collaboration. This strong, powerful message on we need to work together, right? From startups to large companies, institutions, government, even down to the individual. It's not possible to reach that goal if we are not talking or working together. And in fact, one very nice quote that I got from Julio Pernilla, the CEO of Video, and the talk was called "Securing Tomorrow: AI's Key Role in Insurance." And the quote, what it says was, "We need more roundtable style discussions that bring together all the players in the industry to create and share best practices." I could not have summarized this even more. And I think that although this was talked about or discussed from the point of view of insurance, this is something that applies to several industries. Another key point that was talked about was simplify the language we use surrounding metrics. I remember there was a lot of discussion on measuring, right? Measuring your goals, measuring your metrics. And there are a lot of startups, even when we are looking beyond just the 2030 goals, there's a lot of startups out there that provide functionalities on how to measure a company's metrics. But do you go as far as also providing information of understanding what the metrics means? This is another very interesting conversation that we had on these topics of metrics, right? So now when we go back in this idea of just helping us reach our goal as an individual or as a company, our goal for 2030, another question was whether we provide more useful recommendation to help individuals and enterprises to understand and reduce their usage consumption. Sometimes the information can be very high level. Sometimes the information can be shared in a way that might not always help the person with, the audience in general, right? So are we doing it enough? Now, when I was reflecting on that, one thing that came to me, it came in mind was the carbon footprint calculators. There's a lot of them out there, but in my opinion, okay, I mean, if you know one that's very good, that really help people, then please do let me know in the chat or find me on social media. But in my opinion, the information that is given doesn't help people to conceptualize the impact that they have on the environment. Sometimes they might give you like a some kind of data of how much you've reduced, or but is the imagery, is there more that can be done in the way they share that information that gives you an imagery that grabs your mind so that you don't forget, right? So that's one thing that was quite interesting. And in fact, there was a discussion on how to become a net zero citizen. And there was this great story shared by Alessandro Armiota, the CEO at A World. So I believe he was looking at, I think he was looking at entering the fashion market or something like that just before he went to A World. And as he was visiting different plants and looking at manufacturers and trying to looking at trends and all of those kind of things, he wanted to understand a little bit more what colors were trending. So he went to a manufacturing plant and asked them, so what colors are trending at the moment? So how do you, based on your analysis and what's going on in the market? And the manufacturer responded by a very, very, it was kind of very interesting response. But for me, it's a way that when we talk about this idea of imagery and how do you say something that grabs people's minds, and the response was, if you want to see the color that's in season, go and see the color of the river. Wow. Enough said, right? Just that was enough for Alessandro to really start appreciating the impact that fast fashion has on the world, and how that was kind of the one of the seeds for him to build his business and the work that he does now, and why, as part of the discussions, the panel were really emphasizing whether we are really grabbing people's mind by the way we share information. And in fact, that example, that answer, right? If you want to know the color in season, go and look at the river. It says a lot without going into detail of the manufacturing process, about waste, about the impact of dye, about the impact of the ecosystem in the natural ecosystem, like the river and all of those kind of things. So that's why it's really important. And when we go back into helping people, incentivize people to think a lot about the impact and their carbon footprints, is there a way that we can use imagery and storytelling to help people really visualize and have a deeper emotional connection, so that will lead to change of behavior rather than just being told you should, you must, this would be a good idea if. And again, this is, for me, is a great another great reminder to startups in general when it comes to talking about your products. Is about this idea of storytelling, right? How are you using storytelling a lot, or are you relying on jargons a lot when you talk about your products? Because again, when you are pitching, you might not know who's in the room, how much they understand you. But if you can provide, talk about your startup and your product, your ideas, the solution that you bring in a way that it touches people deeply, then you are definitely on your way there. So yes, so just a quick wrap up on this topic. Think a little bit about visualization. Are we helping people to visualize, not just in the context of carbon emission and all of that, but all of this learning can also be applied in your startup? Charts, graphs, are they enough? Do we need more in terms of recommendation, and so much more? One other topic, and I think that's the last one, because otherwise I'm just talking about absolutely everything that we looked at. But one of the topics that was also very interesting when we start looking and considering the shift that's happening in the world is virtual, right? Will the future be virtual? But what is virtual and what is real? Is our real life virtual, or when we are in a virtual world, are we in the real world? And that was really, really interesting. There were, I think, a couple of talks that touch upon those points. One was about virtual infrastructures, and the other one was about avatars. And I think there was a lot of key points which I thought I'm definitely going to highlight on this show, because it really helps if you are a startup to start thinking about the future, right? To start thinking about where you are going next. We are in a world where virtual is overlapping the real life, and some people still makes a differentiation or a distinction. But is that the right thing, or do we need to start shifting? So if you think, back in the days when I was much younger, I'm still young. When I was much younger, I was very, 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 very shy and really didn't like people. And naturally I gravitated to the online virtual world. I used to play a lot of games, like gaming online on different platforms. And I actually met a friend that I didn't see for maybe 2 or 3 years until we finally met face to face, because he was living in another town. I was living in Glasgow in Scotland, and he was somewhere else. But the funny thing was, I never really thought about my virtual friend as a virtual friend. He was a real friend, right? And back in the days when we used to say those kind of things, they're like, oh, get a life. It's the virtual world. But let's look at what's happening now. I was at Madrid Open. So I absolutely love tennis. So I love going to the big tennis tournaments. And last year when I went to Madrid Open, what was really interesting was, in addition to seeing all of my favorite biggest tennis stars, there was one area that were about virtual tennis. So people playing like a tennis competition, but like video games, but they just had screens. Again, the overlap of the virtual reality. Which one is real, which one is not? And of course, this brings us to the metaverse and much more. Now, some of the key information which I thought are quite relevant as we are thinking about the world where we are going in the future, and also rethinking and how technology is opening a new landscape, was this idea of virtual rooms, right? How do we replicate real spaces in virtual rooms? And even further than that, if we want to increase the adoption of virtual reality or virtual headsets, or just the multiverse, are we actually doing enough to help people get there? Especially when we start looking at edtech, right? Is multiverse in something that's still quite untapped when it comes to edtech of the future? Should big organizations, or even small and startup, really start thinking about how do we make learning more interactive? Because going into the multiverse and using the virtual reality technology can help us do that. And maybe that's something that's going to happen more and more in the future? Question mark. There are some progress with wearable tech, but it's not enough. We're talking about the release of, I think it was Apple's new virtual reality headsets, and we talk about the price tag and whether people will want to invest into that, which is quite interesting. And from the talk on virtual platforms, we also look at interoperability when it comes to the multiverse. At the moment, there are multiple universes that are disconnected. And should we also look into seeing whether connecting them in some way could make the adoption easier from a user perspective? But then there's plenty of other questions that came out of that. But that was a very interesting thought, in my opinion, as we can see how interoperability have helped in other sectors in the past. Just to finish off, especially on the topic on avatars, there was one very important question. Again, when we start looking at the world that we want to live in, not just from the technology, but from the people, avatars are more than just graphics, right? It's a representation of people. And there was a big discussion whether avatars represent someone's personality as their whole personalities, or it allows people to express themselves, or a part of the personality that they might not be able to express in other areas. And what does it actually mean? What are the implications? We also look at whether people do hide behind their online profiles to behave in a certain way that they wouldn't in their real life, especially from a negative sense. So the impact on online behavior, moderation, and whether that will also be something that should be really looked into and thought about as we are developing multiverse and the metaverse and going into that's area even more. So this was just another roundup of some of the really, really exciting topics that we touched on. And again, as I've mentioned, there are many other industry. I didn't even mention anything on mobility, which was something that was discussed quite a lot. And I really love some of the discussion on the energy sectors and what was going on and how we are going to move, not just from thinking about energy just from like renewable energy versus non-renewable, and now moving down into the level of, are we bringing people on the journey with us so that people in offices, those who make the decisions, understands the impact, and also they are empowered by making the right choices. Because at the moment the conversation can be very technical, but it's still very at a high level. We need to kind of bring it back down to the people who will eventually make decisions, not just in bigger corporations, but then how do we translate and make the message also easier to understand for smaller companies that wants to join in the game, so that we can reach the goal for 2030. So the last thing that we are going to look at very quickly is just some parting key advice from the investors and also for all of the other sessions. So I'm just going to rattle through some of the advice. But first, just another quick reminder. So if you know a startup that is struggling, especially when it comes to their products or their tech, their people, and they just want to speak to someone, then let them know. They can reach out to me on LinkedIn or whatever platform of your choice. And I'll be more than happy to share information on the one-to-one tech and product mentoring sessions that we run at Athena Leaders. We bring in our amazing friends, other tech experts and startup enthusiasts, people like me that's just in love with the startup world and the ecosystem and just want to give back. So we run those sessions once a month, and do sign up. And if you want more information, yes, please do let me know. And before we end the show, we cannot end without mentioning the winners of the show. So the South Summit 2023 winner was Ulez, a one platform, unlimited ways to collect payments. So that was quite exciting, and sadly I didn't see the session, but congratulations to the startup, the founders, and the team in general. I was busy on another stage having a lot of exciting conversation, moderating different panels, but yes, I had a look about the company and what they do, and I think it's pretty awesome. And again, congratulations. I think there are about 100 finalists in so many different streams. So to be the winner of South Summit is a big deal. So congratulations. So the last session was the last part of this show is pretty much about some advice on how to hack your first round of funding, right? Startups funding is the big thing. We had a panel, and there were some very, 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 very friendly and cool investors on that panel, and some of them are really fun as well. And in fact, what I loved about that was the session was very practical, very empowering and encouraging, and there were even a few others on different stages that really talked about, really brought the investors and the startups together so that they can have this kind of conversations. So on my stage, there were one discussion, but just looking at the agenda, there was quite a few others going on as well. One thing to know is definitely that you cannot improve what you cannot measure. So that was not just talked about in that panel, but other panels also talked about the same thing. So it's really important to get into measuring. Another advice was about pitching, right? So they were encouraging startups to join as many pitch competition as you can. They will help you see what the competition is doing, see how people are presenting their ideas, what kind of questions you're being asked, and improve your experience. And in fact, when I had an hour free where I just wanted to also immerse myself, I even joined some of the pitch competition, and I watched online the replay of some of the pitch competitions, and I could really see the differences in terms of those who spend a lot of time pitching and those who don't. And I would love to give a big shout out to Nika Pintar and Bruno Balen from Annie Byams there for their amazing pitch. Nika was on stage and the pitch was just pitch perfect, right? She nailed many of the key points. Again, we're talking about biotech, wearable tech, and a lot of different, deep tech in there. And but the way that she was presenting the information, talking about longevity and what it actually mean and how we can improve that, and how we can also make sure that we create a product that is not just about the mass market, but if you're going to look at health and longevity, it's really about you, the person at the center. And this is something that they've been working on a lot. So I will definitely encourage you to check out Annie Biomes. I've got a few of their samples, which was amazing. But this was a really great idea, a good example of one of the good pitches that I saw on the day. Other very key question is whether you are putting people at the center of your strategy. This is something that is being talked about a lot. Again, we know that, especially once you go for this investment, is about growing as quickly as possible. And hey, if you become a unicorn, why not? Whilst that is very important, you're never going to get there if people are not at the center and the core of your strategy. So especially for me, which I talk a lot about the workplace playground, it was great to be able to have that message reinforced. One very interesting thing was to kind of change how you talk. Rather than saying, I have a business idea, or starting the conversation or pitch with, I have a business idea, how about starting it by saying that you're working on a solution to a problem, right? So just this change on words can also play and help you structure your thoughts, because do remember, short, succinct always win, especially when emails or when talking. So changing that, framing your word differently can also help. Ask for feedback and not just money, obvious reasons. Start fundraising a year before you actually need the money. Sometimes people wait until they really, really need the money to start fundraising, and that could work against them, especially when it comes to term sheets or conditions or some questions, or even some people might think that they might be too desperate. So what you want to do instead is create a FOMO, right? The fear of missing out. So you want to let people know that this is an option for them to join your startup, because at the end of the day, your startup is amazing. And rather than just being very desperate or showing off desperation out there. And of course, do optimize for what they call the Holy Trinity in terms of the size of the round, the runway, and minimize dilution. But for me, the last advice that I personally have for startups is that do remember that you are not alone. It's a community. And what I love about South Summit, it was the sense of community, seeing people doing, all of the different work, from the big companies, small companies, the startup of 1, 2 people, or those who are scale up, who are unicorns, the investors, whether we're talking angel investors or whatever, corporations, businesses, consultants, contractors, everybody in one room. And of course, there was also a competition for the startups of tomorrow, university students who had ideas, and they also their mini competition, which was fun to watch. So this is it for us. South Summit 2023 is over. And it was an exciting and intense week. And I don't know about you, but I am already yearning for South Summit 2024. See you then. In the meantime, do remember, let's design a happy and productive workplace playground together.